Good evening, everyone, and it's wonderful to be back here with each of you for our next episode of the Transformative Narrative series. A very, very warm welcome to our board members, our staff, our students, and other guests. It is always filled with several reasons to celebrate, beginning with the Gandhi Jayanti, United Nations Day, the Halloween. October is filled with several reasons for us to celebrate, beginning with Gandhi Jayanti on the 2nd of October, the Dashara or the Navaratri, United Nations Day, the Halloween. For us at Akshara International School, October also marks the process of an idea to nurture young minds, the birthing of a belief, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the world is one family, and the seeding of a value system of trust, openness, camaraderie, and support. This October 2021 is extra special for us as we mark a decade of the inception of our very humble beginnings. As I think about each of the guests that we have had as a part of the Transformative Narrative series over these past months, I'm reminded of something that I read very recently, and I quote here, "No two stories are the same since no two people lead the same life. Therefore, to listen to these stories is a privilege," unquote. And a privilege indeed it is this evening as we welcome our guest for this very special edition, Dr. Glenn Odland, who joins us today from Canada, where I believe it's fairly early in the morning, perhaps around 7 a.m. on a Saturday morning. Thank you so much for being with us at this early hour, Glenn. A veteran international educator, Dr. Odland had his beginnings as an English and humanities teacher. And over the years, he has held several leadership positions, including that of principal, assistant head, head of school, and managing director of schools in Canada, Singapore, and India. In his current role, he is a senior leadership executive with the International School Services, as well as the adjunct professor and the IB Educator Certificate Program Manager Academic at the Western University in London, Ontario. What is particularly striking about Dr. Odland's very rich experience is the diversity of his contributions in each of the roles that he has played over the years, whether it was in leading the transition to the IB programs or planning the celebration of a school's centennial anniversary, implementing a technology program, or enhancing a gift stewardship program, or leading the unification of multiple campuses within a school. What a rich set of experiences right there. Dr. Odland is a very well-known speaker. He's an active member of the IB Educator Network, the IBEN, presenting in all 3 regions of the IB globally. With a doctorate in education leadership, management and policy from the Seton Hall University, his workshops and presentations focus specifically on leadership and governance. It's an absolute pleasure and honor to have you with us this evening, Dr. Odland, as we celebrate a very, very special occasion and month here at the Akshara community. The community is very eager to hear from you. So welcome once again, and over to you, Dr. Glenn Odland.
Well, thank you very much, Prabha, for that most gracious and generous introduction. Let me just confirm the audio is clear. Everybody can hear me? Very good. Well, thank you and good evening to everyone. It's a real privilege to be joining you on such an auspicious event, the marking of 10 years in the life of Actor Arbol School is really quite remarkable, and I want to just offer you my personal congratulations for the achievements that you've had to date. And from what I can see, this is only the beginning of a very wonderful story that will only flourish and grow even more compelling as you continue to do your work with young people. I was very taken with the opportunity to be involved in a narrative, in a presentation that was founded on the idea of transformative narrative. There's such wisdom in that topic, and I will share with you that, as you've heard, I began my career in education about 40 years ago as an English teacher. And once an English teacher, I think always an English teacher. And that notion of narrative and the power of story has remained with me for my entire life, and certainly influenced many of my leadership choices and who I became as a leader. But the power of story, I think, comes with a caveat. And for this, to borrow from one of the best known educational innovators of our time, a man named John Dewey. And I'm sure you all have heard of and know John Dewey. And my premise this morning, this evening for you, is going to be based on one of his most well-known quotes. And here it runs like this: "We do not learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience." So it's not just the experience itself that we have that grants us wisdom, that helps us to understand ourselves and our place in the world more effectively. It's from reflecting on that experience. And so what I'd like to do with you today is to lead you through a series of a handful of, I'll call them representative, pivotal events or eras in my lifespan, and break them down for you a little bit. And I want to do that to share with you a really deep conviction of mine, and that's is twofold. One of them is that I believe that the best reflection is done within a framework. In other words, when you have some way to approach the experiences that you're living out or have lived out or anticipating living out, reflecting is always most effective if you have a framework within which to do so. And because, as Prabha so rightly pointed out, each person's life story is different, your own framework for reflecting on that can and probably should be different. But I'm going to share with you mine. And you can think about that, and you may adopt parts of it, or you may use it to develop your own. But there are four elements to this framework. The first of which is to make sense of the experience as best you can. Often what we experience in life leaves us bewildered. We're trying to figure out why things have happened and how it happened as it did. So the first order of business for me in reflecting on it is to do your best to try and make sense of it. And when we're doing that, I would caution us to focus on our role in the experience. Because often when we experience something, whether it's wildly exciting and wonderful or really not that happy at all, often we're looking at other people and what they did and why that contributed towards the event. And of course that has a bearing on it, but ultimately we're only responsible for ourselves. So the reflection and the coming to understand and to make sense of what you can really should be focused on your role within it. There will be times when you simply can't make sense of it. And that first point for me has a corollary. Sometimes if you just can't make sense of it, it's simple. The simple fact is you just need to come to terms with the fact that it happened. And I'm going to give you an example of that in one of the 5 incidents that I'm going to share with you this morning. So do your best to make sense of the experience. Secondly, learn what you can from it. Whether it was a wild success or just a tragic failure, there will be lessons embedded. And one of the purposes and one of the reasons why you would want to reflect on it is to say, wow, that worked really well, or wow, that didn't work really well, or wow, I realized something about myself that I want to either cultivate and make stronger, or boy, I don't want to do that again. And you want to take from it a lesson that you are able to digest and to absorb. And then the third one follows quite naturally from that. Apply what you've learned. It may have an instant, immediate application. It may be something very simple, or it may be something long-term that you really know you need to work on. You have set an aspirational goal, and then you start working towards that. But a lesson is only a lesson. It only has value if you can learn to apply it. So the third one is to try and apply what you've learned. And the final framework is a very sort of open-ended one, and that's embrace embedded opportunities. as you're going through things, while you're reflecting on them, you may come to understand that something that you don't like very much is actually a real opportunity for growth. You may realize that something that you felt was very successful could have been more successful if you had learned and applied and then embraced an opportunity. So that last one is just to make the most of your opportunities as they present themselves. And often you don't realize what those opportunities are until you have gone through these previous points. Now I've listed them in four, what sounds like discrete steps, but they're not separated from each other. They may flow one to the other, or you may bounce back and forth in that reflection process. So I want to share with you 5 what I'd consider pivotal events in my life journey to date. And they are a blend of personal events and professional events. And that also is a reflection of something that I believe deeply. I think in particular, I suspect this is the case for most professions, but I think in particular, in the educational realm, we are really only our best professionally when we understand and weave our personal lives into our professional lives. Let me repeat that. We're only our best professionally when we weave and understand our personal lives into our professional lives. In other words, I think you bring who you are into the workspace and you offer to those around you, in particular, because this is such a people-intensive industry. We're constantly engaging with each other, with our students, with our parents, and that is a function of who you are. As you know who you are, as you leverage your strengths and try and address those things that you'd like to do differently, that's when you become most effective professionally. So I'm going to share with you some personal details too. I'm not going to go all the way back to my birth, but I am going to start with my high school experience, which was, and I'll give you the dates, you'll soon be able to figure out how old I am, so I'll just tell you, I'm 62. I was born in 1959. I was born actually to missionary parents in the Dominican Republic. So they were both Canadians. So I was a registered birth abroad. I was a Canadian by birth, but I wasn't actually born in Canada. We lived in the Dominican Republic until I was 6 years old. Then we moved to Canada, to a very small village in central Alberta, a farming community of about 300 people in the village that we lived in, where I lived from grades 1 through 8. That was a very, it's a wonderful growing up experience, rooted in, family and friends and all the things that you would expect out of a circumstance like that, but very, very sheltered in a way. When I was going into grade 9, so I was 14 years old, my parents took myself and my younger brother, I had 3 older siblings, but they took the 2 of us that were still living at home and moved to Venezuela, Caracas, Venezuela. So I moved from a village of 350 people to a metropolis of over 3 million people. And I'm sure I don't need to elaborate on you. That I might as well have been dropped on the surface of Mars. It was just so foreign to me. I just was lost. I could not make sense of that and struggled with that experience. I just didn't know how to make friends or to adapt in that environment. So I will tell you, it was a really difficult transition for me, moving from that kind of a setting. And of course, my parents were there, but it was, you do life on your own. You go off to school, you try and make sense of things. So I really didn't enjoy life for quite a few months. And one of the functions of that was that I really kind of romanticized what life was like back in Canada and thought, oh man, I just wish I could move back to Canada, and spent a lot of time just kind of fixated on enduring what I was experiencing and wanting to move back to Canada at some point. Only to discover, and so that was 4 years. My grades 9 through 12 was entirely taken in Venezuela. Only to discover by the end of that experience that when I moved back to Canada, moving back was actually harder than moving away. That's a longer, more detailed lesson than I'll be able to share with you today. But what I learned in using that framework, I did not make sense of that experience quickly enough. I did not learn lessons that I could apply, and I have some regrets from that. I do feel that had I thought more carefully about that, I would have done a better job of connecting with Venezuelan friends, of more deeply learning the Spanish language, because I sort of kept myself from being deeply immersed and engaged in the local culture. As an adult, I've realized the impact of those years, and they were profound. They really did open my eyes to a world that was just so much bigger than I would have thought otherwise. And I have developed an increasing sense of gratitude for those years. Even to now, there are times when I reflect back on and realize that some of my convictions about education are rooted in what I experienced in the 2 schools that I attended while I was in Venezuela. But the reflecting part, the learning lessons part, the embracing and maximizing opportunities, I missed that boat. And I mean, you can say a young person, adolescent, yeah, that's true. But I mean, I've met lots of very wise young people who would have understood that lesson. I learned that the hard way. And if I had it to do over, of course, I would do different things differently. So it's where I kind of learned that the world is a very, very big place. Anyway, now for experience number 2, I'm going to take you to reasonably early in my educational career. It's the second school that I was at. It was a school called Lester Pearson High School in Calgary, Alberta. And it was a startup school. And it was my first startup school. The first time I joined a group of people who were tasked with opening a school. And it was a very heady, very wonderful experience. I felt really honored to be, as a young teacher, to be selected to join this group that were tasked with rethinking how to do education. And this was in 1991. So, you know, technology was just really on the cusp. Internet was a new thing, computers were a new thing, and we really tried to break the boundaries of what traditional high school education looked like. And I learned a few lessons about what works and what doesn't work. It was because it was publicly funded, it had to justify really significant investment with sort of massive innovation in that delivery model. 2 lessons that stand out for me. And again, each of these, I want to just sort of take a snapshot of that framework, or how did I apply that framework? And at that point, I was still learning about this notion of trying to reflect on things. And I wouldn't have said that I had a framework for how to develop them, but 2 lessons that really have stood out for me. The first one is probably more a leadership lesson. And that lesson is to beware of introducing so many changes that you don't know which ones are helping and which ones are hindering learning. Because we threw the model out the window and built our own. We decided we would use no math textbooks. We decided we would blend subjects together. We had one day of the week that had no scheduled classes. That was borderless learning on Wednesdays. We twice a year, we had a week where students just took on a project, did whatever they wanted in conjunction with their teacher advisor and with an approved project. So we really threw out the model for what learning looked like. And some things I think were wonderful, but after 5 years there, we had to scale back on some of those things. And because we had introduced so many changes, we really didn't know which ones were impacting which. And so we underwent a number of what I would call backward steps, providing more structure. We brought in math textbooks. Go figure how a textbook can actually give you some help in terms of trying to create a framework for learning. But we really had to think carefully about what it was that we were doing. And ever since then, even though I applaud educational innovation, I'm always really cautious to say, approach this like a scientist. Approach this with an experimental perspective, not from the sense that you're experimenting with our children. That's not what I mean. You need to have a confidence that this something is going to work well before you implement it and you have your children engage in it. But the point is to monitor the impact of those changes so that you know what they are and you can modify, adopt, or discard if they're not working the way you want them to. That was the first lesson. The second one was a lesson I learned from an absolutely amazing colleague by the name of Marilyn Jensen. Marilyn was going into her retirement year. She was old enough that she could have retired in the public system. She chose not to because she was so excited about joining this school. And she was my team partner in one of my humanities classes. So we worked very closely together. And I have to tell you, I was a young teacher and she was on the cusp of retirement. And I had to run to keep up with Marilyn, figuratively speaking. She was so full of ideas and freshness and vigor. And there was just nothing that she wouldn't consider and try, and was constantly pushing me in my assumptions about what the classroom could look like and what resources we might use and how to measure the learning of our students and how to engage them more deeply. I came to understand through my friendship with Marilyn Jensen that age in the educational setting is almost irrelevant. The only advantage that well, there are different advantages for different stages of life, but don't let your age either be a hindrance because you think you're too young or because you think you're too old or anywhere in between, because it is about your commitment. It's about your drive. It is about your focus on students. And Marilyn Jensen lived that out for me every day and was really an exemplar to me of what I think life can be like. So I spent 5 glorious years in this setting, working so hard and just being astounded by it. And then the third thing I want to share with you comes from a different setting. At the end of those 5 years, I had been doing some committee work for the Alberta Department of Education, and I met someone there who we developed this friendship, and she was also an English teacher, and an opening came up at the school that she was at, a school named Strathcona Tweedsmuir, and they invited me to join them. And I explored the opportunity and obviously did. Strathcona Tweedsmuir was an independent, remains an independent school just outside of Calgary. So it's not part of the public system. It's what's often referred to in Canada as a private school. And it operated independent of the expectations of the public education system. So again, great latitude. And so they had programs there that were just so exciting and that they developed because they believed it was really important about learning into school. And it had some great joys and great challenges. This is where I was introduced to IB. I had the great privilege of working with a man named Tony McCowan, who was instrumental in the early stages of the IB, and really sort of launched me into the leadership. So this is where I became a high school principal, and then before I left, I became the assistant head, or deputy head as it was referred to there. But I want to share with you one incident. It was a specific day that changed all of our lives. It was on February 1st of 2003. And just to give the context for it, we had developed a very robust, what we called outdoor education program. We believed that students needed to be involved in their learning outside as well as inside. So we could have what was called an outdoor education program. And as part of that OE program, in grade 10, our students in the early winter, well, the winter months of the year would go on a backcountry, cross-country skiing trip. We had a group of students out in what was called the Rogers Pass in the Rocky Mountains, and an avalanche struck that group and killed 7 students. We lost 7 students that day. And I have to tell you that it just turned our entire world upside down. And you can well imagine. I was the high school principal at the time. There were 240 students in the high school. I knew every single one of those kids and their families. It felt like my children that we had lost. So it was profound, it was traumatic. And I have to tell you, this is the example in that framework that I'm talking about trying to make sense of an experience. I still can't make sense of the experience. I can't explain to you why that would happen. It shakes you to your foundation. And in this case, it was a simple matter of, not simple, it was a matter of coming to terms with it, that this happened and it can't be changed and it is over and these lives have been lost. And what do we do now? And the what do we do now really was what consumed us for months and years. And the lessons that we learned from it, wow. Again, I've delivered more than I can remember or care to try and remember, workshops and presentations and written articles about this event. It really was life-shaping for me and that community. To capture some of the key lessons that I learned from that. One of the ones that I think you would expect is we examined our risk management protocols and we became what I would consider to be an industry leader in outdoor education. We didn't abandon the practice because we still believed in it, but we knew that we had to take steps that would prevent anything like that from ever happening again. So we became really, I think, experts in risk management, in being able to do everything possible to make sure that real risks were, if not eliminated, then certainly managed and mitigated against, and that the perceived risks were ones that students learned from, that they weren't really being taken into these dangerous circumstances. A second one that was a more profound and difficult lesson is that a strong school culture can have hidden perils. Now let me explain to you what I mean by that. Our motto, we had a motto in Latin that reads, nil nisi optimum. And that motto means nothing if not the best. And what we meant by that was we wanted our learning to achieve excellence. We wanted our students to pursue only the very best. We wanted them to give of their best. And so we would always use that as a measure. Is this the best we can do? Is this the best experience we can have? And as a result of that, we developed an outdoor education program that took students to what was really the best cross-country skiing in the world. It would rival the Alps, for example. The Rocky Mountains and parts of the Rocky Mountains people come to them from all over the world. So that's where we took our kids. It was that culture that blinded us to the risks that were involved. And what we had, that hard lesson we had to step back and learn, is to say, we want to continue to offer the very best, but we've let that culture blind us to the risks that we took our students into, obviously, because we lost 7 students in that setting. Another one that I'm going to mention, just for those of you who are at the leadership level, and I heard Prabha welcome board members. I learned a lot about the role of insurance companies in operating schools through that. And that is a very deep lesson for a leadership and a governance workshop on some other day. But I learned about how schools operate behind the scenes. And that was a great learning experience, not always fun, but a great learning experience. But at the most basic fundamental level, the lesson that I took from that experience is that what matters most are the relationships that we forge. If you invest in meaningful relationships at all times, just because it is the right thing to do, and because it is what humans are meant to do, and it is because what education is rooted in, it is about connections. If you invest in those at all times, when you have events like this that turn your world upside down, it is those relationships that will sustain you and support you and give you strength. And I will share with you that that is the only reason that we survived that, is because of the strength of the relationships that we had cultivated, and because of how well we knew each other, and because of the love we had for each other, really, when it came down to supporting each other through that kind of an event. Again, so much more that I could share with you. There are things about transparency in reviewing tragedies. The embracing embedded opportunities in an event that leads to loss of life doesn't sit well with me. I don't really like to think of it as that. But the lesson that I've learned, and what I've come to understand more deeply and live by as well as I can, is that friendships are so important in life, and connections are so important in life. And it certainly had a huge impact in shaping who I am as a leader. A number of years after that, it was time for me to experience a headship. And I was craving an international experience based on the fact that I'd grown up overseas, and our children had just recently been married. Both of them, we have 2 children. They got married, one in 2005 and one in 2006. And so on the night of our son's wedding, he and his new bride got off in a limo and drove off to their honeymoon. And my wife and I got on into a car and drove to the Toronto airport and flew to Singapore. It was quite a tumultuous summer, to be sure. But we spent 11 years at the Canadian International School in Singapore. That was 2006 to 2017. And over the course of that 11 years, experienced enough different contexts for leadership and world events that it just felt like a number of different places. I really can't share with you everything about that. I'm watching the time and trying to make sure that I don't go too long in any one of these. But as I was learning to be a leader, and as I was trying to unpack the lesson, both unpack and apply the lessons that I had learned in previous leaderships, I came to understand that that there was a specific focus I needed to develop in the school. And I want to share with you a brief video clip. And I'll unpack it a little bit once I've shared it with you. But let me just see if I can get to where I can share my screen. It is, I'm interviewing a number of students at one of our campuses. We had, by that point, 2 campuses. And so this is when I refer to TK, it was our Tanjong Katong campus. And I did this film in advance of the school opening full faculty meeting. So let me share my screen with you and play this 3-minute video for you.
Hi, everybody. We're at TK doing some investigative reporting, and we're exploring a couple of really important questions. And I've always found that when you need answers to the most important questions in life, you ask kids. And go figure, we have some kids. In fact, we've got some standing right here. So ladies, come on over. I have some questions I'd like to ask you. And I'm wondering if you would mind telling me, what do you think of when somebody asks you about culture. What does culture mean to you? Anyone want to answer that question?
Good food.
Good food. Any other ideas on culture?
Different people, but it's not how they look, but about what they do.
All right. What about you?
Their fashion.
Fashion.
Like basically what?
All right. So if I were to ask boarding here, we have a couple gentlemen here. What's your name?
Matthew.
Matthew and
Antonov.
okay. So guys, the question I have for you is, what does the word culture mean to you?
Something that people do, like if you decorate your house in a special culture, like Indian culture, something like that.
Okay. And what do you think culture?
Like celebrating.
Celebrating? And if I were to ask you, what do you think the CIS, our school's culture, is like? Hey, what do you think about the CIS school culture? Any ideas on that?
Not really.
You think CIS has a school culture?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think so, but I don't know how to explain it.
Hey, that's a good point. All right, I have another question. Here's another question. Who thinks they know what it means, what the word culture means? All right, what do you think the word culture means?
Sculpture.
Sculptures? Okay, what do you think?
Baby.
Babies. All right, what do you think the word culture means?
Flowers.
Flowers. So tell me what you think when I ask about the school culture. Do you think the CIS has a culture?
I think not.
Think not?
No.
What do you think?
It doesn't.
It doesn't. There you have it. CIS does not have a school culture because I don't know if we're making enough babies. Any other? Excellent. So here's a question I have for you. What does the word culture mean to you? Culture. Do you think you know what culture means?
I don't know.
Do you have any ideas?
No.
Do you think?
I know.
What do you think culture means?
It means that there's something, a statue made out of clay.
A statue made out of clay. That's certainly one form of culture. Let me ask the question this way. Do you think CIS, our school, has a culture?
No. Yes.
Yes? Come on over here, AJ. Come tell me why you think.
No.
No, you think it does or doesn't? Doesn't.
I think it does.
You think it does? Okay, AJ, you think it has a culture. You got to turn this way so they can see you, buddy. Why do you think CIS has a culture?
Because there's lots of beautiful things here.
Lots of beautiful things.
Like the garden and this.
Garden. And this, yes, this.
Does it really have a culture?
Well, that's the question. Does it really have a culture? And why I'm asking what you think.
And the creative playground has culture.
The creative playground. Why does the creative playground have culture?
Because they have stars on the ground that has color.
Stars on the ground that have color. Well, I mean, am I back? You can, oh, let me see. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. Cuteness factor, a little off the charts. I realized I neglected to give you a little bit more background about CIS and why I wanted to show you this video. While we were at CIS, I was brought there at a time when it was growing rapidly and it was expanding hugely. Went from, when I first took on the job, it was 2 campuses, then became 3 and then 4, and then we built a new campus. But it was while we were building, and we had just finished the piling works of the building, about 6 months worth of work, when the financial crash of 2008 happened. And the banks came to us and said, you know that 70% financing? Well, it's now 30%. That clearly was a huge problem that we had to address. And what it prompted was just a very high level of uncertainty. And I don't know if you've noticed this, but parents don't like uncertainty when it comes to their children's education. And staff don't like uncertainty when they know whether or not they're going to have a job or is the school going to close. And the more astute among them knew that we were at some risk of that. So there was a high levels of uncertainty. And as a leader, it was my job really to try and shield or insulate to the extent it was possible from those things that were happening outside of the influence and purview and realm of the day-to-day experiences of kids,
and focus on what mattered. And in order to do that, I really took this stance that we had to shape a school culture that focused on what was in the best interest of our students. And I felt what better way to do that than to use some students to introduce the topic and to have a little bit of a giggle while we're along there, and actually to realize that there were a number of other interviews I did. I won't show them all to you, but some kids who have really quite insightful observations about culture and that we used as a springboard. But what I reinforced for our faculty is that culture is something that is shaped by community members. It is shaped by the conscious choices we make on a daily basis. It is shaped by every action, every word, every exchange, every interchange helps to reinforce or to erode a certain culture. And when you want it to be strong, you need to articulate what that means. You need to very clearly explain what you mean by that, and then make sure that there is a strong level of buy-in. And that doesn't happen instantly, it doesn't happen overnight, but really that was one of the key ways that we focused on what was important, and that was making sure that our children's education was a solid one. And I used to use this homemade definition of success, that successful schools define their success by the quality of the interactions that their students have with each other and with the adults every single day. Every day matters, every hour matters, every class matters. What is happening in that young boy or girl's life that is helping them to understand themselves better, to learn more about the world, and to become more equipped to deal with it. And so that's what we did as a community. And really, I think at the end of 11 years, when we left, it was, I think, a very profoundly meaningful experience for both my wife, Deanna, and I. And we remain very connected to a number of those members of that community, and very proud of what they continue to do as a school. So again, in the interest of time, I'm going to give you my last one, the fifth experience. By 2017, which is when we left CIS, we had at that point 4 grandchildren back in Canada. And I have to tell you, the combined magnetism of 4 young children under the age of, I think 5 was our oldest one, 4 or 5, I can't remember how old our oldest one was at that point. That magnetism, it pulled us away from a community that we loved, a school and city that we loved, just wasn't strong enough to hold us there. So we knew we needed to relocate back to Canada, but I wasn't ready to give up overseas work full-time. So I accepted a role with a group that you're familiar with, Velamal, based in Chennai, to help them build IB schools. And the model was that I was going to spend a month on site in India and then come back to Canada for a month or so, then come back for a month and sort of do this bouncing back and forth and spend not quite half, about a third of the year was to be spent on site, and then the rest of the time working remotely. To make the long story short, we did not succeed in that quest. And there are lots of reasons for that, but this really isn't the time and the place to go into those details. At some other point, I'm happy to, but really what I wanted to share with you is that it was profoundly disappointing to me personally. It was profoundly disappointing to me professionally as a leader to think, wow, we had such wonderful, aspirational, ambitious goals, and I really wish we could have done this, and we didn't. And I wore, some of that as a professional, and so that was profoundly disappointing for me. And there were some lessons that I learned about how to best position your organization for embarking on something like opening an IB school when you've never done so before. So it's not that I didn't learn any lessons from it, but what I left with is that there was enormous personal satisfaction from the learning, from the life experience, and that goes for both my wife and I. It was an amazing experience to actually live on site. We'd visited India many times before, but to live there and to come to know people, and again, thinking of that framework, understanding that there were some opportunities that I had while we were here, and wanting to make the most of those, and wanting to learn what I could from it, from those lessons. The embraced opportunities really, I think, can be captured most effectively in the friends that both my wife and I made, and they remain a great gift even to this day. And as I think back on my life, I think the realization of the opportunities that I missed when I lived in Venezuela really have carried forward ever since. They have really, in a way, propelled me to seek out those meaningful human connections that are so deeply enriching. And really, it is one of those connections that is the reason that I'm here speaking with you today. It is my deep friendship with Ms. Manveen Chadha, who is currently a member of your staff and will soon be embarking on a new venture, and I applaud her for that. I know you'll miss her, but I'm sure you have come to understand what a wonderful human being she is and what an amazing educator she is. And Manveen, Deanne and I miss you still. We remain so grateful for the time that we spent with you, and staying connected to you, even after having left India, remains one of our great joys. So thank you for having made that experience such a wonderful one, and we continue to be so proud of you and the work that you're doing wherever you are. Thank you, Manveen. You are all very lucky to have shared this experience of knowing one of the most amazing early years educators I've ever met. Thank you again. And now I'll conclude with just the framework of what we're living through now with COVID. And I will share with you that I'm still bouncing back and forth between number 1 and number 2 in that framework. And I don't know where you're at with that, because I'm still trying to understand and make sense of something that has changed the world. And there are some ways in which it has changed it for better. I think our capacity to embrace these opportunities makes for this sort of experience where I didn't have to get on a plane and spend a day traveling to you in order to be able to engage with you. So there's some wonderful things about the leveraging of technology for connecting with human beings, and certainly for learning, that I think we're going to want to carry forward. But there's no question that it has had an enormous cost. One of the colleagues that I mentioned, I'm sure, sadly, all of you will have had friends and maybe family members who you've lost to COVID. One of the principals at one of the schools we lost to COVID, and I'm just so sad for Shamita's family and the loss of another wonderful educator. So I'm not at the point where I can say I understand this COVID thing and the impact it's had on our world. But I do have to come to terms with it, and I am trying to learn how to come to terms with it. And I will continue to work, as I'm sure you are, to understand how you can most effectively take forward some of the lessons and become better because of it. One of the things that I would just urge you then is to think about your own life and whether or not you have what I would refer to as a framework to come to understand, to process. Most of us lead such busy lives, and I know that in the middle of life, especially when you are a working professional, you have children maybe, you're involved in very busy schools. There's a phrase that I've heard before and I've tried to live by, and that is, the tyranny of the urgent can sometimes crowd out the time we should spend on that which is most important. And the difference being there, that which is urgent is that those things have to be addressed immediately. That can be a tyranny if you don't learn to set it aside at times to focus on what's most important, which may not be immediate, may not be today, maybe reflecting, maybe a quiet time, maybe trying to plan for your future. All of those things need to be balanced out and given time. So I would, as I conclude, thank you again for the opportunity to share with you. And I hope that you can tease out a few things from those things that I've shared with you, that some of which worked well and some of which did not, and the lessons that I've learned, that you may find that you're able to reflect on your life and learn some lessons that you can apply and embrace opportunities. So that concludes my opening dialogue or monologue, as it were, and thank you so much for your kind attention this evening.
Thank you, Dr. Glenn. I think that was so beautifully narrated. And I think the way you packaged your experiences truly connected to our theme of today, which is, a window to the world. And where there are experiences, there's learning, there's sharing, and there's so much that we are able to draw from what you said. And I think truly it fits in beautifully for a transformative narrative, because the narrative was so interesting. It kept us absolutely, cued in, listening to everything that you mentioned, and the whole way you actually fitted your experiences into that framework. And through the framework, you were able to give us examples and, look at reflection itself. In another dimension was a huge takeaway for me personally. I'm sure a lot of them on this call would agree to that. But one of the things that I must say, as I listened to you, what struck me the most, or what I was thinking, was that the language of the educators seem so similar. It doesn't matter where we are from. The boundaries don't really matter, because I think what we're trying to say, and what we believe in, what experiences we've had, I was able to connect a lot of it. For example, I think one of the things that you mentioned at the start was about, making those changes, but making so many changes that sometimes you don't know what's the impact, and what's something that's effective, what's working, what's not working. I'm sure on the leadership team they will agree that we were in that state at one stage very early on, when the school had started off, trying to look at and learn, and we were this group of enthusiastic educators who wanted to do the best for the students, and in that interest brought in a lot of changes. But we were stuck at a point trying to figure out what's working, what's not working. I mean, that's such a valuable lesson. And like you say, I think only when we experience it, we understand it better, and going into that experience to find out what was our role in that experience. What could we have done better, or what should we have avoided, what should we have thought of when we brought all these changes, were later on, we realized, and we as a team went into it. But the framework itself, I felt, was something that all of us personally can hold on to, because making sense of experiences, that's true in any teacher, any educator's life, right? I mean, day in and day out, we are with a lot of people. And so when we are with people, I think it's a lot about emotions as well. It's not just about coming into a space, working, doing your job to the perfection and going out. But one of the things that we begin to realize, unlike in other professions, what the demand is greater because we're working with people. The transactions that we have with people also is something that we need to be very aware of, which leads to the points that you were mentioning about relationships and connections that we are able to establish and build, so that those connections and relationships become useful in what we do, in like today, bringing you for this session. I mean, we are absolutely privileged to have you. And like I said, it was a delight listening to you. And I think it happened only because of the connections. It happened only because of knowing good educators and having people, who are able to sense that this is a community that would absolutely benefit from an educator like you, who comes with rich experiences. The apply and embrace was something that apply is something that we always consciously think we want to do, because I think today the access to information, access to learning, the connect to what's happening across the globe as far as schooling is concerned is a lot more. I mean, definitely in the last 2 years, 3 years, I think how much we're able to learn about what's happening in the field of education has been so much more. So constantly, I think it's the mind of a teacher, mind of an educator that works thinking of how will this fit into our context. So when you were talking about apply and what we have learned, I was more looking at the contextual connection that apply can, that needs to have always, that needs to be there, because there may be lovely practices happening in another school in another part of the world, but how does that fit with our community of students and parents is something that we need to run in our minds before actually we are able to apply. So I thought that was again a very strong and a very important part of that framework. And the last point, of course, about embrace and pick on the opportunities. I think this is again something I would say I'm not doing enough of it. But as a school leadership team, I think a lot of our conversations revolve around making the best of the opportunities that come our way. So I think to our teachers who are listening also, I think this message is very important for them, because we can't turn down anything as, being something very trivial, very small. It's a very small contribution. I mean, and we don't have to look at it that way. Like you said, it is about making the most of what opportunity comes our way. I mean, in the IB language, I think being that risk taker to take on the opportunities that come your way, and trying to put it to best use. I mean, so the whole framework that way is so lovely, because I think it's um, uh, I mean, like I said, it connects with all of us. And we can use that framework. Now I'm beginning to think all of those actions, when I go back to the framework and ask those questions, what sense did this make to me? What was my role in the whole experience? How can I apply this to my group of parents and students? And, how can I convert this little thing into a valuable opportunity for either myself or my students or my teachers. So on the whole, Dr. Glenn, I think it was just wonderful listening to you. But I personally, amongst all of these points that you shared, what I, for me, a takeaway was about the leadership lesson that you mentioned. Um, like I began talking about it, about too many changes and not knowing where this is heading. That was, I felt very close to me, because um, uh, being a leader, and being a leader for a very, very short stint now, I'm still learning, and I'm on the path of, still growing. I felt this is like a mantra that I need to hold on to, and keep reading this, probably have it somewhere written down in my workspace, and go back and read it time and again when decisions are taken. uh, uh, is what I feel, and that was something that was really, really very, very close to me. And one other thing that I want to mention is about, when you narrated that incident of an unfortunate incident that happened. um, uh, you mentioned about the support and the team coming together. Again, that resonated so well, because I think we've had several times when we have had different difficulties and those ups and downs at school. But in all those occasions, if I'm able to recall, I remember that I think we were able to come out of it only because of the community coming together. And at the end of the day, I think that matters a lot. And even when, those difficult situations are there, when there are parents who come back and tell us, actually, this was something that was very nice that the school was able to do despite this. That sense of, my God, I mean, okay, we have people to support us. There's that trust. All of those things, completely come back, and the spirit and that positivity that gets built up is huge. Dr. Glenn, I can't thank you enough, because I'm personally very, very excited listening to you. And like I said, all what you were able to say, it was like running like a flash in my head, trying to connect to various incidents that have happened in my own life as an educator. So, but you weaved such a positive, tone and messaging around what narrative you brought out today. I think that again is something to be noted, and something that for me to learn and take on when I do things in the future. Thank you so much. Um, but we're not going to leave you so easily today, because the part of reflection is what a lot of times, we keep using that word very easily, but how much of it do we understand, and how much of reflection are we able to do, is always a question. The other two buzzwords are adapt and change. Now, we want to ask you and dig a little more deeper. with some questions where we're going to revolve around these three different words that I mentioned, to kind of know from your experiences how it has been. So I'm going to request Ms. Lata Muthukrishnan to come over and probably shoot those little questions, which will help us get a better insight on what we've been talking about. Over to you, Ms. Lata.
Thank you, Akida, and it was beautiful summarizing of the key takeaways that you've had, and I really resonate with that, Dr. Glenn. It was so heartwarming to hear all your experiences. I was truly fascinated by the simple question that you posed those children and the innocent answers that came out of them, and the deeper cause of what was running through when you had asked those questions and you had concealed something was vivid, I should say. I really would like to do this to you when you were able to take that stance then and kind of pull it through, though you had so much running behind. It means a lot. And yeah, so I have a couple of questions to ask you now. My first question. So from your vivid experience of working in different schools, in different contexts, and in different roles, what, in your opinion, contributes to forward movement of organizations?
Forward movement. I think there are probably two dimensions that I would want to refer to from my experience. And the first one is going to be focused at your leadership team, because I think in order to have continued sustainable forward movement, it requires a certain type of leadership. It requires a leadership that is focused, that is disciplined, that is visionary. Not that it has to be radical, but it needs to have a vision that is communicated to the community, and that needs to be clear and communicated often and reminded and repeated. And you know how communication works, that once is never enough. And I think the most effective leadership is that which is ethical and humble. And I'm a big fan of Jim Collins and the work that he's done, in particular, The Good to Great. I don't know if you're familiar with that one, but in Good to Great, Jim Collins describes what he calls level 5 leadership. And it's the kind of leadership that is focused on not just exalting yourself and not just making your importance the prime focus, but it's about what you can do, sometimes up front, sometimes behind the scenes, but it's always done with that forward movement in mind. So I think organizations that are moving forward, they only do so when they have strong and focused leadership. So that's the first dimension. And if an organization isn't moving forward, as a consultant, that's what I would first look at, is to say, describe to me your leadership, and I would want to unpack what that looks like. But I don't think that's enough, because even if you have strong leadership, for an organization to move forward, it requires the community that is involved to have a certain level of buy-in. I don't know if you ever achieve 100% buy-in in a community. There's always going to be maybe a person or two or a few people who are going to either drag their heels or just don't want to, or their life circumstances are keeping them from being able to understand and buy in. But community buy-in is crucial. And by community, I'll refer to the 3 pillars of a school community. That is the faculty, that is the parents, and that is students. And each of those have a different way that they need to understand and buy in. But without the buy-in, without a group who agree that this is a worthy goal, this is where we should be going, this is how we should be, in this case, delivering education and supporting students and measuring that learning and having parents develop partnerships with us. Unless there's a buy-in from a fairly strong level of the community, you won't move forward. And one of the things that I would just want to caution about this is that notion of buy-in and that notion of forward progress, I believe, is best measured in the long term. And you may want to create short-term goals that you can measure, and management writers always talk about the quick wins and low-hanging fruits and all these things that are, just used to describe how you can say, oh, look at this, what a wonderful thing we've done. And it's used to encourage, and that's good. Do those things. But really, the most substantive and meaningful forward progress is that which takes place over the matter of years, and is sustained because everybody says, this is important, this is what we're going to focus on. Your leadership shows the discipline to be able to make sure that resources are available, that you don't get distracted by a shiny new object, some new idea that comes along and say, let's do this too. There are things about leadership that need to be in place in order for that forward momentum. But when those two things are aligned, and when a community decides that something is important and you're going to move forward on it, that's when you start to see authentic, sustainable forward momentum and progress.
Thank you for that. Starting off with having a vision and articulating that, and the community getting together, directed towards the purpose, I think is very, very important. I'm able to relate to what you're trying to say, connecting back to what we do at school in AIIs. So the next question I have is a whole new world indeed. The landscape of education has transformed. Adapting to change is the most discussed topic. Any change for that matter. Shifting from one profession to another, marriage, taking on new roles, brings with it the need to learn, to unlearn, to learn new skills, and the need to turn gears very swiftly, leaving us with many emotions to balance. It could be anxiety, stress, happy, frustration, long hours, fatigue, confidence, all of that revolving around. Now, I would like to ask you, what has helped you be steadfast in handling these changes and the emotions it brings with it?
Well, first, let me compliment you on the way you've structured the topic and the question, because you are absolutely right in identifying that change, the prospect of change even, and certainly living through change, provokes really strong emotions. And without acknowledging, understanding, having strategies for being able to address them, that change can be overwhelming and sometimes really be counterproductive. So the focus on how do you manage that, starting with emotions, but obviously, then that has to support the actions that we take and how we absorb and make the most of those changes, is a very wise one. So I think I'm a very blessed man from this perspective. I have been married to my best friend for about 41 years. And how I've managed the changes that have gone through my life, when I think about some of the most demanding experiences I've gone through, the avalanche was one of them. Another one was our transition to Singapore, where I was halfway through a doctoral program. We'd left our family behind in Canada. We were living in a new country and a new school in a totally different environment. The stresses were really substantial. I have in my best friend and my wife, my most loyal supporter, the best sounding board, sometimes the most honest critic, but there's such deep trust. There's such enormous respect. Ms. Manveen will know what I'm talking about, because Deanna is a gifted educator. She's not just a wonderful person. She's much like Manveen, just a talented, gifted educator who was always a wonderful sounding board for me in considering how I was developing as a leader. And that sense that we cared so much for each other's well-being. It doesn't have to be a spouse. And if you're lucky, you may have that in a marriage relationship, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the only source for that. It can be a friend, a group of friends. You can have a sibling or another family member, somebody who can occupy that position. And I've often described it as, you always love that person, but you don't always like that person, because they can be very honest about what they need to tell you. And it doesn't change the depth of your friendship or your love or your relationship. It only strengthens it really over time when you do that. But that to me is crucial. And here, let me give it a nautical analogy, if you will. When we are out sailing in the midst of these storms, the turbulence, the peril of being out in the open seas and stormy weather and rocks that we don't know where they are, you can flesh out that analogy for yourself. That is an exhausting experience. I think in order to survive that on a sustained basis, you need to have a safe harbor that you can go to, and you need to be able to sail into that safe harbor, and it needs to be a place where you can know that you're safe, where you can reflect on, you can recover from, you can examine, you can do some of that processing that you need to do, so that when you go back, and whether it's the next day, the next week, the next year, whatever the time frame looks like, you go back to it with a renewed strength and generally speaking, another insight. And for me, that safe harbor, that refuge has always been my home. I would walk in the doors of my home, and whatever was happening professionally and the nonsense that was going on in life, you don't leave it. The emails keep coming in and you have to deal with things, and it's not like it's gone forever, but it is at bay. It subsides. And so that was my way of doing it. But it can be a book club that you meet with on a weekly basis. It can be somebody who was a childhood friend who knows you so well that you connect with. It could be a parent. It can be anyone. But I believe personally that the most effective way of dealing with that is through the kind of stability and strength that you get from that kind of a friendship. And it can be 1, or it can be 10 or 20. It doesn't really matter. It depends on sort of how you're wired as a person. But for me, that really was what I would say in a nutshell. And of course, as you do that, you develop strategies. Those conversations I had made me a better leader. They made me a better English teacher when I was a teacher. They made me a better leader when I became a leader. They made me a better husband and a father and friend, because of the kind of help that you have in the reflection. And so that, for me, my secret was that amazing lady I married 41 years ago.
Thank you for sharing that personal note. I truly relate to what you're saying, because it is those relationships and that safe harbor, that safe space that kind of protects us through and gives us that bouncing board. I truly relate to that. I can think of back here what happens at home, and many a times it's not that my son or daughter is like 20 years younger than me or 25 years younger than me, but they are able to give that comfort. They are able to give us those insights at those times. So I absolutely agree with you that that's very important. Thank you, and I'm going to pass the baton to Akila.
Thank you, Lata.
Thank you, Ms. Lata. Dr. Glenn, one of the things we keep hearing is about that change is inevitable. I mean, we understand this, or we keep saying this many times. We keep hearing it many times. Now, in the context of how you've been handling such varied roles in your career so far, there would have been opportunities where having to change and having to adapt become the crux of what you do. So the reason I mention this is because when one moving from one school to another, the culture of the school and the place of the school itself is completely different, and it's very unique to that school and place. But even within a school that you've been working for a while, when you take on new projects or new initiatives, you're having to work with different team members. So change and adaptation are something that will absolutely be needed in the role that you do. So I'm asking this question because I'm hoping this would benefit all of us on this call. To understand, how do you as a leader strike the connection with the staff that you worked, that's one of the things. And how do you bring in changes in a way that are in line with the school culture? Whether it's in a new place or whether it's in an existing school, how does this happen?
Well, thank you. And what I'm reminded of is a part of a conversation that the 5 of us, or the leadership team and I, had before this call started, and I was looking at your logo, the beautiful visual symbol, and you'll see I am still a metaphor junkie, which I became as an English teacher, and I love the metaphor of the tree as a symbol for learning and a symbol for growth. And I always adopted what I would call an organic metaphor, an organic approach to change, because I believe that true, authentic, lasting change does not happen quickly. It has to be grown. It has to be cultivated and nurtured and developed, pruned and watered, and made sure that sunshine hits it. So the starting point for me in terms of how do we make sure that we cope with change and make sure that the changes that are being brought about are consistent with our school culture and are ones that are going to last and take root and outlast us. And that was always my measure of success, was not what things were happening when I was overseeing it, but what things are going to happen when I've left, what things are happening when we're not watching, what things are happening when teachers go off and they're not, being immediately supervised and students aren't being immediately supervised. That to me is what is lasting, internalized, authentic change. So it's fine to set ambitious goals. I'm not trying to suggest we shouldn't do so. Set the ambitious goals, but make sure that you are understanding of the timeline of how you're going to achieve those goals. Allows for that growth and that metaphor. Make them realistic and don't let those setbacks discourage you. And I know that in particular, teachers who join an IB school and who are enamored with the vision of it and with the scope and think, this is great, I'm so excited to be joining an IB school. And then you join and you realize, oh my goodness, I've got all this work I have to do and this training I have to do. And wow, is this what it means in terms of assessment and the preparations you have to do and all the things that are involved in it, and the discouragement can set in. So it's important to have that long range perspective in mind, that the changes happen, small incremental changes, and enormous change can happen, but it will take a while. And you're absolutely right in focusing on the term connections. And here I'll zoom in on the leadership notion. I think it is absolutely crucial that you make connections within your community, and that's how you're going to understand what the culture is. That's how you're going to be able to use that culture and find the ways to make sure that it is something that people understand because they know and are connected to you as a leader. So let me give you three quick examples of the strategies that I adopted at CIS in Singapore, which was already a pretty sizable school, about 1,500 students when I came, and ended up being over 3,000 by the time I left. So big school. For staff members, here's one of the things that we did. And here again, I will reference my partner in crime. Deanna and I used to pick up our new staff members at the airport. Every new staff member who was hired, and often I had been the one to interview and to make the decision to hire them, but sometimes it was other members of the leadership team or done remotely. But we always picked them up at the airport, and regardless of the time of day or night. And often the flights coming from North America and Europe were landing at midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning, and we would bleary-eyed, they're holding up the signs to welcome staff members. And I just can't tell you how many people, when we left Singapore, and in all the acknowledgements and celebrations, and how people constantly came back to that, the connection that was made with that first interaction by meeting them at the airport. So develop strategies that will help you to connect with your staff members. I had to, unfortunately, one year we had 60 new staff members joining. It was an enormous growth year, and anyway, at that point it became physically impossible. I just couldn't be in all the places that needed to be, so I had to start delegating and farming that out. But until that point, for several years, we met every staff member. Parents, it's crucial that you connect with your parents, and parents are increasingly hugely valuable members of our team from the perspective that they are partners with us. They need to support what's happening with their students, understand what's happening with their students, mirror and continue with the learning, excuse me, when the children are at home and not at school. So parents, you need to connect with them. So the strategy that I chose was that at the beginning of the school day, every day, I would stand at the atrium. And it was a place where many people came in, whether they dropped off or had come through public transportation or however they came. It was one of the primary entry points. And I would be there every morning for about half an hour. And parents knew that if they wanted to see me, you will find me there every morning from 8 to 8:30. And so it was a really significant way for me to connect with them, and was one of the strategies that I used to help connect with the parents. And then with the students, I used to suspend whatever I was doing, and I always made sure to structure meetings that allowed for this, because I ate my lunch with the students in the canteen. And it was a boisterous experience. It was great fun. It's one of those things that just keeps you centered and balanced and rooted. And as you can tell, I mean, kids just thrive. And if you're ever discouraged as an educator, go down and visit your JK or your youngest students, whatever age they happen to be, and you'll walk away feeling much better about life, because they just have an exuberance. So find ways to connect with your students as well. But that has to be deliberate, and it has to be a disciplined set of choices that you make as a leader. And then when you do, then you will understand A, what the culture is, and B, how you can shape it in ways that you think are important. Again, in that growth analogy, by pruning and watering and planting and doing some things that are going to help to move forward and to be able to adapt and leverage the changes that you want to see happening within your school.
Yeah, very, very clear, and very important that the connection goes to the parent and happens with the students also. But I think from what I understand, giving it the time is very, very important. After we've taken the effort to build that relationship or build that rapport with whether it's the staff or whether it's the parent or the student, and not expecting things to happen overnight, and the changes and us adapting or the staff adapting into the situation, shouldn't be something that we expect it to happen just for a project or for an initiative. It is something that needs to be sustained at a school, and needs to be given that time and that effort into building that connection first before we look at moving ahead. I think absolutely makes really a lot of sense, and able to relate to what we go through also. So one of the things that I came across while reading something was a quote by Ignacio Estrada, and this was, if children can't learn the way we teach, maybe we should teach the way they learn. So when I read this quote, I was immediately able to say that reflection, yes, is the key to student learning. But as much as it sounds so easy and seems perfect, the process of reflection isn't so, because, we all go through it, and, sometimes we're stuck. So it takes, I feel, several years to actually build even that ability in us to be able to reflect and reflect deeply. So if you can share with us how you use your experiences to reflect, and what have been some of those valuable insights you got while you were reflecting that helped you actually shape your career and move forward. I think to a lot of young people out here who are absolutely aspiring and who are looking at growth, it would help us a lot to hear from you.
Well, thank you. And I love that quote. And one that echoes that is a plaque that my first head of school, Tony McCowan, had on his wall. And the plaque read, "Do not prepare the path for the child, prepare the child for the path." And that's exactly what this quote that you had is the same message. And so I think it's brilliant and powerful. Well, you're going to hear the English teacher in me coming out in my response to this, because here's what I think. There is a handful of things that I would say worked for me, and that I would encourage any of you who are wanting to think of how you can become better at reflecting. The first one is force yourself to crystallize your thoughts into something coherent that can be shared. Think of the difference between thoughts that are just jumbled around inside your head and when you need to try and explain it. And there's maybe an intermediary step. And I'm a big fan of journaling. I believe that when you force yourself to write sentences and you choose the words and process what you need to put down on paper, it's going to become more clear in your own mind. And even more so, having conversations with people. And again, these are those people that you can trust to say just those things that are most, deep and profound for you, and that you're not even necessarily know what it is you're trying to say, but you're struggling to find the right words to express them. when you have to crystallize your thoughts into something coherent, you force yourself to make sense of it. And reflection is just that. Reflection is trying to make sense of that which currently doesn't really make much sense. It's lurking in the subsurface. You've all seen that pyramid, sorry, the iceberg metaphor, where about a third of it is above the surface of the water and that much is below the surface. 2/3 is below the surface. And it's that has a number of different applications. And one of them certainly has to do with what we think and what we understand and what we know. And what we're trying to do is to lift that iceberg, if you will. You're trying to create more of it that's above the surface. And one of the ways to do that is to make sure that you've explained it to an actual audience, a close friend, or consider, if you want to consider your journal your audience, or other forms of art could also do that. I'm a big fan of using words because I think that's the way my mind works. But if you have a better way, organize, sort, and make it coherent in some way. And then a second one that kind of goes along with that, learn to listen to your inner voice, if you will. And there's lots of different expressions for this. And it's often called a gut instinct you have, or women's intuition is one of the ways you're saying. Sometimes it's called a conscience, or those thoughts that just won't go away. Pay attention to those, tune into them, explore them, and ask yourself why they've started to come to surface. And as you do so, I think that one of the things I would caution is that you learn to distinguish between fear and caution. It might look the same. Fear is to be acknowledged and understood, but not to be mastered by. Caution is to be listened to very carefully. Make sure that you're distinguishing between those two things. Learn to distinguish between passionate excitement for something and kind of a delusional fantasy about something. And those are two that you don't want to get mixed up. And you can sometimes sort those things out as you start to express them and explain them, and you have to make them more coherent. Make sure that you can sort out the difference between a real mistake you've made that you need to address in some way and unfair criticism, because you'll face that too. And so the sorting out that happens in your head and in your thoughts as you reflect, to me, only happens when you put those things into words. And you are absolutely right. This is not something that you just instantly put and become a really good reflector. It's a skill that you develop. It's something you have to learn to do. So be patient, be disciplined, build your own framework, or discover your own way of doing that. But whatever you do, keep doing it, because here's we've referred to IB a few times throughout the conversation. But one of the things I love about IB is that it expects that. It expects us to do it. It expects our kids to do it. And it pushes us to acknowledge, and I'm going to borrow from their mission statement, it pushes us to acknowledge that others with their differences can also be right. That's the concluding line to the IB mission statement. Wow, I think our world desperately needs that, don't you?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think no two ways about it. I think the sorting part is very interesting. I think I'm able to, once you said that, able to connect and think of it that once you sort, I think there's a lot more of clarity, and then bringing out what you're thinking and actually spelling it out. And if there is an audience for it, if there is a group who's listening to it, I think that would make it absolutely more effective a reflection, which actually guides us to what is the next step, where do we go? And I think this is something that we do a lot. I don't know if that happens in schools that you've been. What we call as, we have a staff room culture of actually pouring out and talking, and when we are stuck, when we are confused, when things go really bad, it always helps when you come and you pour out and you actually articulate the difficulty that you have to your colleagues. That brings in, springs up so many options on what you can do, and you feel a little low once you hear all those options and you think, okay, there is a bright light at the end of the tunnel. You feel, okay, this is great, and that energizes you to say, okay, I'm going to go back into this class once more. So absolutely
wonderful.
Yeah,
I applaud that.
So we do a lot of that, and I think that's the starting into what you're saying to get more organized and reflecting deeply. I'm going to request teachers to, ask questions, because I think this is a wonderful opportunity for you to ask Dr. Glenn uh, questions that would help you understand a lot more into being a teacher, being a leader, and from his experiences. Over to, I mean, if you're okay, you can unmute and please share your question, or you can put it up on the chat box, and we'll be able to take it forward.
I just had a very question that popped up into my head. You spoke about borderless learning and a few things that you tried out. So on a scale of 1 to 10, where would you rate yourself as a risk taker, as a leader, when you have your check boxes to tick off at the end of the year?
I think it would be on the high end of that. I think going into that experience that I talked to you about in Lester Pearson High School in Calgary, I was probably an 11 and should have been more like an 8. So I think I've dialed back from those, what I would consider to be really radical changes, but I'm quite prepared to take some risks. I think what I would share though is my appetite for taking risks is balanced, but I would call risk mitigation strategies. And I think the risks need to be explored, understood, managed to the extent that they can, and then move on with it, because life is a risk. And so I would put myself at probably an 8 or a 9. I'm not, in my youth, I did skydiving and a few things like that. So I had an appetite for risk on the personal level that have subsided considerably as the gray hair advances. But professionally, I think risks are embedded in any meaningful change that I think you need to be prepared for some. But it's not, I mean, that's a personal choice that people make. So yeah, 8 or a 9 probably.
I have a question. This is on behalf of all the aspiring young teachers here. What has been the driving force for you to be an educator leader? I think you have had a lot of roles to play in your span of experience. So what has been that driving force that has made you sustain to be an educator?
Yeah, thank you. It's that is a really perceptive question, because it dates back to the choices that I made when I was in university to enter a teacher training program. And it was because that's when I met my wife. I met Deanna, and we started talking about what we wanted our life together to be like and our family to be like. And it was part of what propelled me towards a career that was immersed in people. And I never looked back from that point. The classroom experiences for me were always driven in just the exuberance of young people and how much fun it was, really. The first couple of years are stressful because you're still figuring out how to manage the classrooms, and you're only a few years older. And when you become a high school teacher, you're only a few years older than your students, and you have to work through the way to manage the classroom. But after those first few sort of turbulent years, it's about really enjoying the experiences that you have, and kids pick up on that. I always felt that kids were the most astute observers of their world. And both as a teacher and then as a leader, one of the things I always wanted to do was to listen to kids, and not that you solicit this, but you listen to the things that they admire about colleagues. And what I came to understand is that kids were very discriminating in knowing which of their teachers liked being around them. And if a teacher liked being around kids, that was the starting point for good learning. And that's one of the things that I tried to carry forward. And it came quite natural to me because I quite enjoyed it. And so my foray into leadership was prompted by several people along the way kind of nudging me and saying, have you thought about it? Would you like to? And you kind of dip your toes into that and see how it's going to work, and come to understand that it can be very meaningful for the same reason, because you're connecting with colleagues in a different way. You're connecting with the parent community in a different way. You are helping to then shape the circumstances and settings where your colleagues can do their best work. And there was just hugely meaningful because of the impact it has on people and because this is such a people-intensive industry. And if you can enjoy the experiences that you're having with those around you, that's the starting point for effective teaching and for effective leadership, I think, as well. So thank you, Vinutha.
There's a question from Ms. Isha Matthew that I'm just going to quickly read out. Her question is, it's easy to say that all stakeholders, there needs to be a buy-in from all stakeholders, but it's the single most challenging thing that drains leaders as they try to put it all together. How do you keep your compass points up and persist and persevere with doing things that have relevance for the learning community as a whole?
Well, again, another astute question. I think, like so many things in life, we ascribe to a set of values. We constantly are a function, our actions are a function of that which we value. And most of it, I would like to think, is a choice that you make. Sometimes they are very deeply enrolled, and you know that you value this internally, and you don't have to think about it all the time. And so you're trying to live that out. For me as a leader, I always wanted to make sure that my colleagues understood how much I valued their contribution. As I said, I measure the success of a school based on the interactions that children have with themselves and with the adults. And who do they interact with? Teachers. Teachers are the ones that are front line, so they are the most important. So I will share with you that I made a really what I consider to be a very significant mistake when we moved into the new campus we were building in Singapore. We had been working at it for years. It was a big event. We actually moved in October, but we didn't do our celebration until the spring following because it just took a few months to get everything lined up. And we built a theater that could accommodate 500 people. And the 500 people that, as a team, and I wasn't the one who was only responsible for this, but the 500 people that we invited were dignitaries, government officials, from our parent community. We did not make space for colleagues. And it was an oversight. It's like often you find that you're least patient with those family members that you love and care for the most. And you're the least patient with them. You think about them, they're the afterthought. You think about other people instead. And I realized that I had not lived out that value. I had not honored my colleagues, and didn't happen right away, but there were ways in which by the end of that year, people were telling me, you really haven't honored the work that we've done. And it's not that they were bitter or whining about it, it's that they were being very honest with me. And so what I'm sharing with you is that how do you do this? Well, partly you do it by making mistakes that are so lasting that you just don't make that mistake again. And that hurt. I took that really personally as a professional. I took that as a really serious mistake that I'd made that dishonored my colleagues, and I've never forgotten that. And so I think this notion of reflection, this notion of examining your experiences and trying to tease them out really helps to make sure that those things that you value most don't get set aside in the busyness and the chaos and the things move forward. And are you acknowledging everything you need to? And when you've made a serious mistake, that one isn't one you'll make again. So I don't think you'll ever not make mistakes. We're human. We will make mistakes. It's what do we do with them? How do we learn from them? How do they make us better as people and leaders?
Thank you. Thank you so much for those words of wisdom. And I think we'll take one last question, and this is from Ms. Saraswati. The question is, being reflective or a risk taker, which is more important for a leader?
Okay, well, I mean, it's the question is phrased as them being mutually exclusive. I think I'm gonna come back to and say, I think the reflective part is the crucial bit. And I think some people are naturally risk takers and others are not. So wherever you find yourself on that scale, I would not say that you can instantly turn yourself into a huge risk taker. You're just not. I mean, again, I'll reference Deanna. Deanna's not a risk taker. She balances out my risk-taking appetite because of that friendship I referred to. But I have the deepest respect for who she is as a person and a professional. So you don't have to be a risk taker. You do have to be reflective. If you're going to be your best, if you're going to be able to offer the highest level achievements and performance and personal satisfaction and the learning of your children, you absolutely have to be reflective. But if you're going to be a risk taker, make sure that your reflective skills are also very strong, because you want to learn from the risks, you want to be well prepared for them, and how you do that is through that process of reflection. Very interesting question. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that notion of balance and actually looking at what am I tipping more towards and where is it that I need to work further on, and the fact that they're both equally important. Thank you so much for this absolutely, I would call it a up close and personal, inspiring narrative. And also thank you, Ms. Akila and Ms. Lata, for steering that conversation after we heard those initial thoughts from Dr. Odland towards some very, very important conversations and dialogue that we need to continue to have around culture, around balance, around leadership, around education, the need to build relationships with all our stakeholders. Some very, very important aspects that came out. And I have to say, Dr. Odland, true to being a teacher, you just kept us absolutely hooked in, as I think along with you, we went through those moments of joy, exhilaration, regret, trauma, but also a lot of positivity and optimism and hope. It's been absolutely enriching to listen to and engage with and make those connections as we have heard you through the course of the last, I think about 85 minutes. We don't even know where the time went. It seems to be a day where all of us are coming up with analogies and metaphors and quotes, maybe because we are amidst a very tall English teacher. So here's another one from my side that I want to share that, I've seen these words of this very, very famous psychiatrist, Viktor E. Frankl, and he says, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. And I think through whatever you took us through and all those thoughts that you've shared with us these last 80 plus minutes, I think over and over and over again, this was something that kept coming back. That yes, there is experience, but there's learning out of every experience, and experience and learning and growth is forever. And let's not shy away from making those mistakes, but what can we learn out of it? How can we grow out of it is what we need to keep focusing on. At Akshara Whole, I think change and reflection are very, very close to our hearts. Reflective practices, I believe, have always been the driving factor for us to be able to embrace change as and when we encounter it. And in line with the spirit of our 10th year, which we began the year with, inspire, shine, and share, the ideas, thoughts, and the personal experiences that you have shared with us, I'm sure are going to stay with us for a long time. And I really hope that it will empower each one of us as we experience those different emotions and different situations that we have been going through, continue to go through. When we looked at a theme for the 10th year celebrations and we called it the whole new world, it seemed rather simplistic set of lines from a beautiful Disney song. I don't think at that time we realized how that windows that are opened up by each of our guests through the transformative narrative series would present absolutely breathtaking and exhilarating views for each one of us. And I think with today's session, there's been that one such window which has been a gateway for each of us, both for the world outside as well as for the world that lies within us. So thank you once again so much, Dr. Glenn Odland, as well as to each one of the members of our board, our staff, parents, students, and guests who joined us this evening. Until the next transformative narrative session of the series, let's sign off this Saturday evening here in India, and wishing you a lovely weekend ahead with your family back in Canada. Thank you all so much, and stay safe and continue to stay healthy. Thank you.
Thank you for the honor of being able to join you. I have known of Akshar Arbol for some time and sort of followed from a distance. I now feel like I'm much more connected, and I'm so proud of you and keen to follow along with you as you shape the next 10 years and beyond. And thank you to all of you for being such a wonderful audience, and you're most welcome. It was absolutely